Tell us your name and
Hi,
institution.
I'm Rachel Carrillo. I'm a freelance writer, but I'm associated with the United Nations Association of the USA, and used to, until recently, served on the board of directors of the Boulder, Colorado County chapter of the United Nations Association. I thank you all for your presentations. It is Oceans Week, and where we celebrate oceans and marine life and marine health. And so my question is kind of relating to that. In the context of climate change and marine life health and the coastal communities that are also impacted not just by conditions of climate change like major floods, major storms and tsunamis and things like this, but the actual disruption of food production. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and what could be contributed to your journal, since that's an area that you say is faltering, or not very many publications concentrating on that. There's a whole conference of people down at the Ronald Reagan building from all over the world who are, focused on marine life this week. And so they would be very interested, I think, in submitting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Any other comments in the room that I can pick up? And if not, I'll come back to the panel. This is a remarkably shy audience, not typical, but let me come back and ask if the panel wants to respond to Rachel, and also if Richard and Serge would like to respond briefly to the remarks of Suresh and Catherine.
I'd like to briefly answer this question. It's an important point. So this is one aspect which I detected in the publication records of the journal, which is that very, very few papers are dealing with food supply generated by freshwater and the sea. The truth is, and it's hinted at in many of the discussions we've had already, the roots of the, as a problematic, as a theme for research, the food security to a large extent is born among the agricultural research community, to a very large extent. Not entirely, but to a very large extent. And well, a parenthesis, it's not very well known, but the reality is that some Neolithic revolutions took place at different places, at different times, very different locations. Some of them took place nearby the sea. And there are Neolithic revolutions, Neolithic societies, which were born from the sea and which have had a tremendous importance in the development of societies, like in Japan. The truth is, nevertheless, that we carry this burden of history, which is that the bulk of the scientists concerned by food security issues, the bulk of them are coming from the agricultural sciences. And this is why there is a misrepresentation. This is essentially when another way to answer the comments from Dr. Ragassa, Catherine Ragassa, is to say we do not decide, we're not the only ones to decide who we are in a journal. We're trying to publish the best papers there is. And we cannot say to the writers, to the scientists, to the potential authors, to say, you shall write this. We cannot order them to line up and do and publish more on this and that. No, all what we can do is to produce some kind of incentive, is to show that we are prepared and willing to review those submissions and later on publish them. And so it is not easy to be multidisciplinary. It is extraordinarily difficult, but if you look at the panel of senior editors, you will see that there is a medical doctor, there are agronomists, and there are different economists and different disciplinary areas. So it is a major challenge, and it's not, contrary to what's been said, it's not because we overlook it. Not at all, not in the least. We do with what we have, and we are trying our best. That's what we do, yeah.
Thank you, Serge. Do any of the panelists wish to also reflect on both the question and on other sort of interactions? If not, I'll come back to the room. Richard, you wanted to make a comment?
Thank you. Thank you for the comments. Yes, we have published on. We have published on, for example, the Haitian earthquake, and one of the factors that has come out is that there is competition amongst aid agencies there, which has not been very helpful.
Thank you very much. Suresh, did you have your hand up? If not, I'll come back to the room. Yeah. Okay. I see the first hand over here, Melissa, and
Yes, Suresh Babu, you have mentioned a couple of issues that you would recommend should be picked up in the future in food security, among others, resilience of agricultural systems or food systems, among others, the nexus problem: energy, water, food, and they are fundamental, of course, to food security and also to the interdisciplinarity. So my question to Serge and Richard: to what extent have you seen an increase in papers addressing these topics in food security in recent years? Or where do the papers go that address these issues? Because they are not new, they are 6, 7, 8 years old, these concepts.
would you tell us your name and institution?
Okay. My name is Raimund Rötter, I'm one of the senior editors.
Okay, interesting conversation. Melissa, the gentleman right behind you in the yellow shirt, and then David after that.
Michael Dibley from Sydney School of Public Health, and I'm a senior editor for nutrition on the journal. My question to the panel is, we've identified some gaps or areas where, for example, not all the papers are actually interdisciplinary, or there are particular topics that aren't covered. So my question to the panel is there any role for the journal to try and stimulate activities with or publications in those areas through special issues where you might have an editor that would create a sort of a brief of the sort of papers you want? So both from the perspective of the editor and from the perspective of someone who's published in the journal. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And then David Spielman right behind.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm David Spielman from IFPRI. So where do the editors and the editorial board stand on the issue of open access and the cost of open access publishing? I would imagine that if you're publishing a food security related journal, where some of your articles are, as Suresh was saying, really important to food security in developing countries, that the profit margin Springer makes off your publications is also a disincentive to, or a barrier to, people accessing information in those countries. So what's your thoughts about open access publishing and its costs?
David, thank you very much. Do we have any online questions? Okay, and let me, if I may ask a question of my own. Serge and Richard showed a remarkable 5-fold growth in the number of pages in the journal over 10 years. And I'm very curious, what is the driver for that growth? Is it just incredible submission of journal articles? How do you manage such growth? So 4 questions. Let's begin with the editors and then come to the discussants.
I wish I knew the answer to the growth. And I expect Serge will too, perhaps to try and mute it a bit. But it's definitely an area which a lot of people are interested in. It is scandalous, really, that in 2019 we have somewhere around about 800 million people who do not have enough calories. We have over 2 billion people who are lacking in vitamins or micronutrients. And then we have over 2 billion people who are obese. Why do we have this? And since more than half the world suffer from that, I think it's not surprising that we get papers about these issues. There's a question about David Steele asked, is it feasible to ask Melinda Paul, who is the Springer representative here, to answer that question?
Sure, we can. If she will raise her hand, we'll pass the mic to her. Melinda? Right there. The mic comes your way, and then we'll come back to the panel here.
Can you repeat the question that I'm answering?
Well, I prefer, rather than mangle it, to ask David Steele to repeat it.
So it was just a question about the cost of open access. So you're from Springer. That's wonderful. So Springer charges for open access, right? Springer is a business. You make money, and yet you're publishing articles on food security, on issues that are fundamental to the health and welfare of societies and communities in developing countries. How do you reconcile those two things?
That would be a very long question for me to answer in this venue, but let me see if I can do my best here. So as far as developing countries, there are many initiatives whereby our content, even our paid content, is distributed free to them. And this is definitely a journal that participates in these programs. Hanari, people here may actually be familiar with some of them. Another one of the answers to that is that the open access publishing world is changing rapidly. We have initiatives going on in Europe, Plan S, all kinds of different arrangements between the publishers and the institutes, that the researchers that are consumers of our content, whereby the whole financial structure is changing. So that's, and I'd be glad to talk to you about this afterward if you'd like to learn more about it. But I can say things are changing, and I've been in the business a long time, so I'm witnessing more and more access to both. We're seeing open access changes and changes in the paid content, and food security participates in all of that.
Melinda, thank you. We put you on the spot and appreciate that you responded to the question. I come back to the panel. You can't get away from me. Serge, I believe you're next, and there were several specific questions as well as overall questions, including from your colleague over here on whether you're seeing an increase in various topics, resilience, the nexus, and of course the other questions also.
If I may, I'd like to come back to the two commentaries, the two responses we received and which have been made, and some of the very important things that Dr. Ragasa just said. Let me, and there was this question also regarding how to produce incentive to publish in one direction or another. If you recall, I presented slides showing the different components of food security. Those includes necessarily the value of food, the nutritional value of food, safety, and so on. So it may be the seventh and last component of the components of food security in the published material. It's not meaning it's the least important. It is a crucial element which is addressed by quite a few papers published by the journal. But then I would agree completely that this may not be representative of the size of the problem. So one first thing to please understand is the size of the problem is one thing. The level to which this problem is being addressed by the scientific community, as reflected by publications in the journal Food Security, is something else. So that's, so when we have, so this is, the slides I showed, the summary of publications I showed is only representing what we see as we are. I am very myope, and so, and we don't see things as they really are, probably. And that's a fact that it's interesting to be aware of it. Now, as for the, I'd like to open a very quick parenthesis in saying we are meeting as colleagues involved in the journal Food Security, together with Melinda Paul from Springer, and we are talking together, and the direction the discussion is taking is more of a, if I may, and I'm speaking maybe too fast, but we are more talking of a science project than of a journal. We are talking of a science project which is involved in the diffusion of science related with food security. It's many dimensions, it's many scales, many problems which are associated with it. But we are addressing it in the way of what is it that how can we make our journal more relevant, in the sense that it's a project where we also, for instance, want to invest time to assist and help young scientists in the developing world to publish. And this is, so it's not easy, and we have to, it's a balancing act between this and other things we want. I hear about the impact factor. I don't hear much, but I hear something. And in my view, the impact factor of the journal is not necessarily the most important criterion we have. And it's the diversity of things we do within the journal. And so we're speaking more of a science project where we try to address these issues of interdisciplinarity. I come back to the first discussant, where issues are raised with silos of research and science which are not coming together, the very definition of what interdisciplinarity is, etc., etc. We cannot impose this on authors, and criteria are very hard to develop. We shall try to foster and to encourage as much interdisciplinary and pluridisciplinary research there is, but we cannot invent that research if it does not exist.
I'm sure we'll come back further into the conversation, but let me give Catherine and Suresh a chance to respond, and this conversation of incentives also comes in. With any reflections?
Yeah, I'm coming from a researcher's point of view. So a comment on, for example, fish, oceans, fisheries. It's very important. Actually, the observations that I have just mentioned in my remarks, it's not specific or unique to Food Security Journal, but it's reflective of most of the journals on food, sustainability, and rural studies. In fact, there's a recent meta-review paper published recently in the Food Security Journal, where they've reviewed papers on food, sustainability, and rural studies. And the finding was that there are major gaps, and major gaps is fish, livestock in food systems, and also food processing, distribution in the middle of the chain, and consumers. So these are underrepresented, not just in Food Security Journal, but most food and rural studies journal. And they also added that food security and nutrition is still a marginal topic in papers that deal with food systems. So, but I see this as an opportunity for Food Security Journal to be a leader and trendsetter. And I'm saying this, because there are other competing journals. As a publisher, as a researcher, you can publish in many articles, right? It's not only food, security, journal. But there's global food security, agricultural systems, for example. These are all interdisciplinary, journals that as a researcher, we can publish on those ones. So what I'm, saying is that what can we do to create that unique or enhance that unique contribution, or to find that niche that if you're looking for a topic like food security, that to go to journal is food security. So and I have a suggestion. You take it, or if you find it useful. But I'm just thinking that what if for example, a journal can adopt a food systems approach, or develop any type of common unifying framework that would guide the review process, the screening process, and the acceptance process of the different papers. This framework, it can be in a form of a report or a note or something like that. It can be promoted widely to researchers or potential researchers, especially young emerging researchers. It can be promoted widely that this is the framework that the journal is taking. So these are the gaps, and maybe this through this framework and the identified gaps through this framework, there can also be special issues that can be further promoted and developed. So, and then there's one, journal wherein they also, develop, special issues, and they get guest editors, young guest editors for younger researchers. I think this is European Journal of Development Research. So they have that also mechanism or an arrangement that could also work. So these are just some of my, suggestions on how we can, promote and develop that niche for the Food Security Journal.
Catherine, so many ideas. I feel tempted to set up a journal at IFPRI. But let me come to Suresh to respond, and then I think Richard wants to come back.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. You just said what I wanted to say. So it is, Serge, it's okay to say we receive the journal. We can't, decide the researcher's research, but we can decide what journal paper we will accept. That's the role of the editorial board. And that parameters have to be clear. I will give an example of both an editorial board member of this journal, and I am also reviewing journal papers for other journals. There is a journal paper that I kind of rejected because it was not of that quality in an agricultural economics journal. And that was submitted to Food Security. And then I came to review the same journal paper. Now, I'm not going to sit there and say Food Security Journal is a low quality journal to accept papers rejected by a mainstream disciplinary journal. I mean, that's not why I'm not going to waste my time in the editorial board if that is the case, that what we are going to do, right? We are looking at food security as a journal in its own right to bring the best multidisciplinary nature of work that people can do and encourage people to do more of that. And that is why we will be valuable. If we start accepting the papers that are rejected by mainstream disciplinary journals because it can accept other papers, then we are going to fail. I mean, that's the issue I'm raising. Will it apply to the same pathology journal, for example? American Journal of Pathology rejected something, and then if it comes to food security, you are not going to accept that, right, as a pathologist. So that is the issue I'm raising. So we need to have our own standing as the best journal for interdisciplinary research. Then we are worth being there. Otherwise, why would I publish? And in fact, this kind of journals are not even taken seriously for tenure track kind of evaluations. So I come to this journal to see, like Catherine said, hey, there is a valid utility and usefulness to change things on the ground if you are really solving the problem of what Borlaug raised. What is pathology community doing for food security? Same question can be asked. What is marine biology community doing for food security? And that is the answer. The journal answers those questions. I mean, you can also bring marine biologists to publish in this journal in the context of food security, right? So that is the point I'm raising here. I mean, we don't have to accept if it is not multidisciplinary. So that's where the concept note of what the framework is for our journal is very important. We have come 10 years successfully, but now we are good. We can now in a position to push the quality upwards and say this is who we are. So that's for something to consider for the editorial board.
Thank you, Suresh. I'm cognizant that we have 12 minutes. I believe we have an online question. Let me come to that in one moment. And then I'll do a final round over here in the room. Maria?
Okay, so I have a few questions. I'll start with a couple, and if we have time, we'll come back for more. So, Sri Lakshmi from India, the National Law School, asks, often food adulteration and packaging material is ignored when one is talking about food security. Is it possible to integrate the same, and can studies be carried out at the local or national level? And the second question is from Ramesh from the India Agriculture Group International here in the USA, and they ask, briefly, what about the social accountability in the area of food security, including nutrition?
Thank you. 2 online questions. Let me come back into the room and see if we have any further questions, comments. I see Emma's hand here, Melissa, and then Julie behind you, and then Indira.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Emma Quilligan, and I work here at IFPRI. My question is related to Suresh's point about capacity, and as it relates especially to higher education institutions in developing countries, because they're not only consumers of research, but they're also producers of research, sometimes very high quality, very impactful research, not always the best well-written up research, and I can say this as a former technical editor. But it's very important that this research gets out there. And so whose job is it to make sure that these journal articles are of high enough quality that they can be produced in a very good quality journal like Food Security? And linking back to David's point, if someone is working at a higher education institution in a developing country and they can't afford the open access fee, does it mean that their research is only available in paid content? Or is there schemes where these institutions can make their articles also open access?
Thank you. Let's take Julie at the back. Right to Melissa.
Julie Kurtz from IFPRI. Somewhat building on Emma's question here, just sort of wondering about what the role of outreach is for food security, but other journals in this sector. Since the ultimate goal is not an impact factor within an academic sphere, but really to reach audiences that that may not be acquainted with an academic world and academic literature, but also sort of integrating them into that process, and especially in terms of how who your audience is also shapes the kind of literature that you are reviewing and that is a part of your publication.
Thank you, Julie. And then we have one moment, I think. Yeah, okay, then.
These 2 points are extraordinarily important in my view, and I thank you for raising them. I may not have been clear enough, but Food Security as a journal, in a way, in several ways, is a science project, and one of them is to provide assistance to young authors. Those people, those colleagues, those authors are coming most of the time from the developing world. And what is done in the journal, and I've seen this doing for several years because I was involved in the journal before, is that we make bets. We find submissions that, have lots of issues, but where we detect, as editors, reviewers, and so on, where we detect a potential. And then, unlike many other journals, we shall go a very long way to improve those submissions so that they come to a publishable standard. It's taking a lot of work, lots of efforts. Our colleague Stephen Waddington, the Deputy Editor-in-Chief, is spending lots of time on these submissions, which go into up to 8 reviews. It happens. It happens. And so some articles that you may not notice in the journal are, in fact, the babies of the collaboration between the editorial board and few authors who have submitted, sometimes 2 years ago, a manuscript which was in difficulty. So we do that. This is important, and that's one of the key elements of the project, if you will. And it, in a way, this is very far away from this kind of competition which was mentioned before about impact factor, other competing journals. We are not looking for stars. We are not necessarily. We do invite authors. There are reviews which are invited. We do that. But we are not. This is not a star system where we would like to publish the best articles there is and have the highest impact factor we can have, because this is a fact of the time. An impact factor is something. It's a transition. This is what is interesting at a given point of time. What we do is invest. So we try to do that. Back to a specific point in terms of food adulteration, which was sent via internet. Food adulteration. This is. We had this discussion already this morning. We don't like too much to talk about borders, limits. We prefer to talk of directions in the journal. Food adulteration is something I would personally consider with caution as being part of the journal, in the sense that there are so many other elements, that are related to law, to law enforcement, to all kinds of issues that are very, very far from the fields. And very often those issues of adulteration and so on are not interdisciplinary. They are involving very specific and very focused research. So it may not be that this kind of issues fits very well in the journal.
Thank you. I'd just like to pick up on Catherine's points. Am I helpful? Right. We have got a series of papers coming out, a special section. We tend not to have special issues, but we have special sections. And this is on the food insecurity experience scale. And that's quite multidisciplinary. The other thing on the multidisciplinary theme is that I have been in the habit of annually having very short summaries of papers which I think could give rise to action. So taking up Norman Borlaug's ideas, we want to do things. So, and I call these alerts for policymakers. And I'd like to take up also the internet question about adulteration of food. Very briefly, there's a very sad paper from Ghana in which, with the best intentions, people are trying to introduce foods from weaned babies to get them into a more adult diet. And to do this, they've been using legumes and cereals. Unfortunately, the legumes are severely contaminated with aflatoxin. And this is a very important factor, which I think is, in relation to its importance, is underserved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me take one last intervention from the room, and then we give all the panelists a chance to make closing comments. I cannot neglect Indira over here, so Melissa, please pass the mic to there.
So I'm Indira from IFPRI. So our researchers so far published about 40 articles from food security from the Springler, and global food security from Elsevier about 50 articles. My question, I have a couple of questions, like usually when researchers want to publish, they have selected criteria. Some of the criteria is they look into the impact factor, they look into the editorial board, they look into the topics. But Sergey, you mentioned that impact factor is not is the main criteria, and but our researchers always look into the impact factor, and also for ranking they look into the impact factor. And also I have other question is like, because global food security, right, Elsevier, so I'm not comparing Elsevier and Springler, but Elsevier is also highly ranked journals publisher. So when they have the topic of global food security, and Springler has, are there any negotiations? Do you want to collaborate with them and do one topic as a food security journal? So do you have any plans?
Thank you, Indira. Let's give the final round then to our panelists and closing comments also.
So what's important, in my view, when publishing an article somewhere, is that your article be read and be cited. And it can happen even in a journal that is not a top-ranking journal. So this is what matters, not the impact factor of the journal. And the other very good reason to publish with food security, to publish with us, is simply that we are the best. I'm not comparing. We simply are the best because we are the most diverse. We may be very slow, but we are the best. Simple, plain and simple. And I'm serious.
Thank you. Richard, any comments on your side? Any closing comments?
Concluding comment I'd like to make, which has not really been mentioned so far, is extension. We've got to get down on the ground and see why crops are not growing and solve those problems. In sub-Saharan Africa, the productivity of crops is about a quarter of the potential. So I really like to emphasize that.
Suresh, closing comment?
I thank you for mentioning extension. That's why I mentioned this institutions that are contributing to food security needs to be studied, why they are functioning, and that should be part of our journal papers as well. I'm also, since the law issue came in, adulteration, holding accountable, social accountability, I also want to mention about psychology of development, psychology of food security, particularly in the tsunami affected areas, what happens, and also macro psychology of development. The Malawi food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy is a classic example of how country feels about using even subsidy to export the crop and feel good about it. That psychology of a nation depends on policies, and the policies can be wrong in order to improve the psychology of the country. And those kind of issues need to be addressed somewhere. And so I hope we can take up some of those journal papers here.
Okay, an advertisement and marketing for the journal. The journal has been, one of the most, efficient, very fast journal in terms of reviewing and then accepting, papers. So I really, really appreciate and thankful for the efficiency of, the process. You've talked about, the production and also the extension part. I think it's really crucial to focus on the production, side. Very important. But since we're talking about access to nutritious, safe food, I cannot overemphasize the importance of looking at the functioning of the markets. And markets, when we talk about markets and food systems, we're talking about three different things: traditional, mixed, and modern, systems. That they coexist, with each other. It's not, one over the other, but the whole full, systems operating side by side. And I think, there's an opportunity for this journal to look at those typologies. And since, these different typologies have different challenges and opportunities for addressing nutrition and food security issues that we face. Thank you.
Serge, I would like to thank you and your colleagues for having the courage to come and have this remarkable seminar, and opportunity for all of us to contribute to the continued enhancement of the journal. I really think it is wonderful that you opened yourself up to share these trends and gave us the opportunity to offer our comments, feedback, suggestions. I think I hope you have sensed how much interest, commitment, dedication there is, that to collectively work together to make this journal even more diverse, relevant, useful, and as you say, a chance for us to flower so much of the young talent around the world. Please join me in thanking our panelists for this remarkable presentation.